I don't know about you guys, but every time I pump gas into my car, I kind of curse under my breath. These prices are getting ridiculous and there's no end in sight. What the hell is going on? Since like us, many of you are wondering how this is happening and why gas is so expensive, we decided to jump into the crazy world that is big oil and try to understand how prices are established. Some of you might have heard about OPEC, but did you know that it was created to counteract an already existing cartel called the Seven Sisters? This and much more in today's video. Check it out. The team here at Not For Everyone went above and beyond on today's video. So a quick shout out to everyone who researched and helped put the pieces together. As you can imagine, it wasn't easy. Big oil is not really known for being the most transparent industry. So finding out what is actually happening was not easy. Today, the biggest player in ultimately controlling gas prices is called OPEC, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. In order to better understand what OPEC is and how they operate, we took a deep dive into why OPEC was created in the first place and what big oil looked like before OPEC existed. From the 1940s until the 1970s, the big oil industry was under the control of the Seven Sisters. If the term Seven Sisters sounds a bit sinister, then you guys are not alone. The Seven Sisters were 7 oil companies that controlled over 85% of the world's oil reserves. They were the original oil cartel. The Seven Sisters included the following companies: the Anglo-Persian Oil Company, which later became BP, Royal Dutch Shell, or as we know it, Shell, Standard Oil of California, Gulf Oil, and Texaco. These 3 then became Chevron, Jersey Standard, and Standard Oil of New York. They merged and became ExxonMobil. By the 1930s, these 7 companies dominated oil production around the world. The companies had exclusive rights to the oil in Iran, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and the Persian Gulf. These companies would go in on joint ventures, establishing new companies that would own the rights for those oil. For example, they founded the Iraq Petroleum Company together. These types of joint ventures would legally tie their hands together and promote cooperation within the Seven Sisters and prevent cheating on one another. They had agreed not to produce oil in the Middle East unless it was coordinated with one another. So basically, they colluded to make sure they controlled oil production and thus oil prices. In the 1940s, Saudi Arabia oil fields were found, which could have become a threat for the Seven Sisters, but they acted quickly, and 4 out of the 7 sisters got exclusive rights to Saudi oil, so they were able to keep it in the family. The Seven Sisters cartel had 2 main priorities. Number 1, keeping oil prices high by coordinating production and distribution. And number 2, cooperating with the local governments of the territories that the oil reserves were on to minimize taxes and royalty payments. This second one was one of the main reasons why OPEC exists today. In order to pressure the local governments, the Seven Sisters would use every tactic they had in their arsenal. Don't forget, they are huge multinational corporations, and we all know that ultimately it's about the bottom line, even more so in big oil. They would slow down production of oil when taxes and royalties were increased in certain countries and ramp up production in another country that had more favorable conditions. They would leverage the US and British government's willingness to pressure and coerce the host governments to comply. The Seven Sisters were politically influential. They owned the entire supply chain of oil, from oil rights and extraction to the retail gas stations in the US. They were very well organized and able to negotiate and pressure local governments as a cartel. It was said at the time that they decided who would be the next government leader in the countries they operated in. They were in full control. Understandably, this pissed off the locals. At one point, the local governments bit the bullet and nationalized the oil industry, saying that all oil rights belong to the people and that the country would be managed by the governments they have been elected. Thus, OPEC was born. Before we jump into the current situation of oil prices, please help us out and drop us a sub. It only takes 2 seconds, but it means the world to us. Go ahead, just push that sub button now. Okay, back to big oil. Where were we? Right, OPEC. OPEC was founded in 1960 by the governments of Iraq, Iran, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and Venezuela. The founding of OPEC was the turning point towards moving away from private corporations of the Seven Sisters and giving control over natural resources back to the sovereign nations. In these countries, state-owned companies were formed that took control over exclusive oil rights. OPEC really took off when they were able to raise oil prices dramatically in the 1970s. This made OPEC countries very rich and proved once and for all that OPEC is a power to be reckoned with. OPEC's main mission is to stabilize oil prices and ensure sustainable supply of oil. They do this by controlling oil production. The energy ministries of the member states meet twice a year and agree on production quotas for each exporting country. Since it's pre-decided how much oil each country will produce and distribute, oil becomes a finite resource, and as such, the price is very controllable. OPEC has grown from the initial 5 member states to 13, including the countries of Algeria, Angola, Congo, Equatorial Guinea, Gabon, Libya, Nigeria, and the United Arab Emirates. In recent years, OPEC also had oil production quota deals with non-member countries, or what's called OPEC+, which includes another 11 countries, most prominent being Russia. OPEC controls 40% of the world's oil production and over 80% of the world's oil reserves. Now that we have a grasp on how and why OPEC was founded and the structure, let's take a closer look at how exactly they're able to maintain oil production sustainability and make sure oil prices don't fluctuate. OPEC countries produce oil off of pre-agreed quotas. This means that they have the capacity to produce more, but they produce less to maintain those quotas. This is called spare capacity. Spare production capacity is the key to the entire OPEC strategy. At a blink of an eye, they can always produce more or less oil with no time lag and no additional investments required. When the price of oil goes up, they can start producing more, so adding supply to the market, which will lower the price, and vice versa. When the demand for oil drops, so does the price. OPEC can counteract that by reducing production quotas, which will in turn boost the price. Now, critics say that OPEC is basically a large-scale cartel that makes the price of oil more expensive for everyone, but studies have found that this is not necessarily true. It's an oversimplification of the more complex issue. It doesn't take into account supply and demand shocks. One thing we hate more than high prices is price volatility. If the price of oil jumps up and down, it would be extremely hard to budget in your day-to-day life. It would be almost impossible for transportation and logistic companies to sign longer-term deals. Airlines would have to manage their prices almost daily. This is crucial. Let's imagine a scenario where OPEC doesn't exist. This means that all oil-producing countries will pump out oil at their maximum capacity. There'll be no quotas. There would be no need to maintain spare capacity. The more I pump, the more money I would get. That would be the mindset. So everyone is pumping out oil as much as they can. Then we get a supply shock like war, or there's an industrial accident at one of the production facilities, or an embargo. Because this scenario, there is no OPEC, so there's no spare capacity. This would create a huge supply shock, and the prices of oil would skyrocket overnight. This happened in 2012 when the prices of crude oil surged. It is estimated that if there was no spare capacity to counteract the price increase, the price of crude oil would actually be $46 more than where it actually landed. A study estimates that if there's no spare capacity in the world, global welfare loss would be $360 billion a year, and that number would only grow. If all countries were producing close to or at capacity, those price hikes would also take much longer, as adding capacity would require capital investments, new shipping routes, etc. So sorting all that out takes a much longer time rather than with spare capacity, where they can simply turn on the pump and supply more oil tomorrow. We get it. Spare capacity is important. Price volatility is bad. But ultimately, the higher the price, the better for OPEC states, right? Why wouldn't they just raise the price nonstop to make more money? Well, yes. The higher prices, the better to a certain point. If oil prices go up too much, that dampens economic growth, which in turn will lower the demand on oil, which is not good for OPEC states. It's a balancing act of getting the most revenue without killing the golden goose. Since the Second World War, every economic recession in the US was preceded by higher oil prices. So what's going on now, and what will the future look like? There are two factors to take into account when discussing the future of big oil. The higher the price of oil becomes, the more profitable it becomes to extract oil from harder to reach places that costs more. And two, renewables. The cheapest oil to extract in the world is considered Saudi Arabia. For them, no matter how low the price gets, pumping oil is still going to be profitable, and that goes for a lot of the OPEC member states, not including the ones that are mismanaged or have a very high corruption rate in the energy sector, which boosts the cost significantly. In the US, shale oil is much more expensive to pump out, so it makes more sense when the oil prices are high. If the current trends hold, the US would surpass Saudi Arabia and Russia in oil production within the next couple of years. To be clear, this might be good for the US strategically, but it wouldn't have much of an impact on oil prices because US is not an oil exporter, just the opposite. Even with these higher production numbers, the US imports almost 300 million barrels of oil a month. So in comes renewables. The new renewable energy sector's growth will have a significant impact on the demand side of the oil equation and will reduce OPEC's overall influence. But that is still a long way off. Currently, when oil prices are rising, the main points are OPEC and OPEC Plus have cut production. So as of now, OPEC is still a force to be reckoned with. Now, to be honest, the current gas prices we are seeing at the gas stations are not completely up to OPEC. There are middlemen in between that actually buy, distribute, and market the gas you pump at the stations. Exxon, Chevron, Shell, and BP set retail prices not based on the current oil prices, but based on crude oil futures, the price they expect it to be in the future. The greed part is as soon as they expect any future price increase, they raise the retail price immediately. But when they expect the prices to go down, they wait until it goes down, then they're safe and secure, and then they lower the prices. Although oil prices have been steadily decreasing since March of this year, those four companies, Exxon, Chevron, Shell, and BP, have reported profits of more than $50 billion in 6 months, which is the most it's been in the history of those companies. So although OPEC plays a huge role in production capacity, seems like the successor of the Seven Sisters are still alive and kicking. Thanks for sticking around, guys. I'll see you next week.